Hello, everybody. It's Ashley of Stacks and the City, and I want to say hello and welcome to you. I'm so grateful that you guys are here. As always, guys, please make sure that you subscribe and rate my show 5 stars and leave a comment if you guys can. Now, today, I know that I normally talk about money and wealth building and money management and building your net worth, but I really want to switch up the conversation today to delve into the travesty that's been happening and the issue of police brutality in the United States that specifically targets minority communities, specifically the African American community. As many of you all know, last week, George Floyd was brutally murdered by Derek Chauvin as he was strangled by his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds until his death. And as a result, it has sparked a nationwide outrage and protests, international protests, demanding justice for George Floyd and the countless others who have been victims of targeted police brutality. I really wanted to share some of my thoughts on this situation, on this issue, primarily because for us in our community, it seems very obvious what the system has created for us in terms of targeting African American communities, certain minority communities, we know where they are, targeting these communities, finding information to any means of arrest, and as a result, they're arrested and they're part of the system. But you all, what bothers me is how even though this has been an ongoing issue for at least 10 years, not even, it has been gained national attention for 10 years. It's been an ongoing problem, but why hasn't there been any change? Why, despite the evidence that pours and supports this, why hasn't there been any change? And I really wanted to do some research, specifically understanding the conservative opinion of this issue and how it affects the lack of change within creating a better law enforcement and those that do leave us alone for just being ourselves. And this issue is relatively personal to me because when I was growing up in rural North Carolina, we had a bridge that we had to take before we got home to my mom's double wide in North Carolina. And there were times in the evening where there was a so-called suspect on the loose, and there would be cars that were backed up. And the Weldon police force had every right to stop your car and pull out your license. They have flashlights pouring into your window. And I never thought about it until now. It is a form of finding ways to criminalize you just for being yourself and riding around. And this has been seen time and time again. So, for example, maybe my mom didn't fit the description. Who knows? But she's showing her ID. What if there was possession of marijuana? Even something small. What if we weren't buckled up? Instead of them stopping us for something they saw, they are automatically stopping us because they already assume that we're doing something wrong. That's what it felt like. You're automatically being assumed. So it's this notion of being guilty until proven innocent. And I believe that is the narrative that our people have subconsciously faced as we're living our daily life. There's a book that I read a couple years ago that I talk about called The New Jim Crow. And essentially, the central argument is that the new wave of systematic oppression is the prison system. Step 1 was slavery. Step 2 was Jim Crow. Step 3 is prison, meaning that they use laws and processes, quote unquote, to target a certain amount of person and throw them in jail. Namely, this was done through drugs, through the crack epidemic of the 80s, marijuana charges. We see these things all the time. Whereas white counterparts who do just as many drugs as we do, if not more, are getting off scot-free. And y'all trust and believe, I've witnessed that myself. Anyway, we're not really digressing, but these are the things I want y'all to put in your head as we talk about why is it that our conservative counterparts don't seem to gauge the argument of police brutality targeted in certain communities? And you all, after doing some research, the biggest conclusion, the most general thesis I have for this is that at the end of the day, there's a divide between the amount of trust and distrust that our people have in the judicial system. Conservatives completely trust the process. They trust the way that people get into custody. They trust the way that the law works. They believe that the way that the structure of our country and the Constitution was created is going to benefit people. That is what it is. Why change that? That's what it is. Versus an immense amount of distrust from another large group of people. And this is why folks included, we will grandfather some of y'all into, is that why trust a government that wasn't really created for us? Why trust the government when we know that these laws aren't there? The notion of innocent until proven guilty, which is in the 10 amendments of the Constitution, don't apply to certain people. There is no reason why we should be on the ground dying if we're supposed to be innocent until proven otherwise. Now, I'm going to talk about that point a little bit more, but I really want to give you guys 3 points that support this claim, this conclusion that I've drawn. And again, y'all, I've been researching conservative news. I've been listening to conservative podcasts. I've been obviously knowing what the more liberal side says. And it's not even necessarily about that, y'all. It's really about what is obvious and what we see and what people don't see. And understanding why they don't see it so that we can better push our agenda and better create a space that's more safe for all people, our people, in our communities. So, y'all, there's 3 points as to why there's this sense of trust and mistrust. And first, and why we haven't been able to change what's been going on in our communities. And the first is the police and its power of the unions. The second is, again, the trust and distrust of our justice system, specifically how that works. And the third is the invisibility of systematic racism. And that's what it is, y'all. Systematic racism is truly invisible. It is embedded into the DNA of our country. So it's going to be very difficult for someone who doesn't know Black people and only sees what they see in the media and the news in order to determine whether or not this is a racist act or not. It's not supposed to be something you see. That's the point. That's what makes it so dangerous. So let's delve. Let's talk about the police, y'all. So as we know, and I believe some conservatives are using this argument as well, because this is obvious. That's what makes this one so cray-cray. This one, like, if it wasn't obvious before, this one was obvious. It was 8 minutes and 46 seconds of obvious. Derek Chauvin, the gentleman who has been recently charged, I believe it's second-degree murder at this point, as of now, correct me if I'm wrong, but he has had excessive force charges since at least 2008. And even then, he has not been charged. He's not been fired from the Minneapolis police force. So why specifically is that? And it's because of something called unions. Now, the union, you all, essentially is a protectant. It's a group that serves to protect the interests of a certain industry. So they will lobby on Capitol Hill to advocate for their behalf. They will ensure that its people are paid well. They ensure that the interests of the profession is being handled accordingly. Now, are unions a bad thing? It's hard to say. It's a controversial notion. Unions started at the turn of the 19th century. Unions were created to protect the working class of our country. So when people came to Ellis Island, the immigrant story, that wonderful story I love to talk about, they were working in very, very, very poor working conditions. And y'all, we're talking no food, 12-hour shifts, getting, sweatshop type of stuff. So at the turn of the 20th century, specifically, unions were created to help advocate for these working class people, to ensure that they had great working conditions. So in that sense, it makes sense. But today, it is a little funky, because part of what unions do is it makes it extremely difficult for people of certain professions to get fired no matter what. And this is the case from what I've read with Derek Chauvin and a lot of other police officers. Because it's so heavily unionized, it's extremely difficult to fire these people. Now, it's changing in some cities. They're trying to be better, but that's, from what I've seen, a really, really big issue. So it will help to abolish police unions, or at the very least, make it a process to make it easier to fire people, to fire those who are blatantly hurting folk, killing folk. You know what I'm saying? Another point I really want to make, you all, which is about the city and local governments, the state and local governments, and the power that they have. You all, the federal government doesn't necessarily fund our police force. Your property taxes do. That means when you buy a house, part of the money that you're paying will pay the police force. They are working for the state or the local government. They're a state trooper. They obviously work for the state. If they're a local, they work for the local government. So part of the reason why it's so difficult to try these people and have justice is because when people are tried, they are tried at that local level. So if you're living in a city that is traditionally more conservative, if you're in a city where most of the people are Republicans, conservatives who don't seem to understand, are completely tone deaf when it comes to what systematic racism looks like. And again, we will discuss that later. It's going to be much harder to convict these people for being quote unquote bad. And, cops are everything. They are, in their eyes, the people who protect us and keep us safe. So why would we convict people who protect us and keep us safe? They're obviously doing their job. That's their argument. That's what they see when we talk about these things, at least from what I've been reading and what I've been researching. That's why, y'all, it's really important to vote for your local leaders if you can, because they're the ones that will determine and make these rules about the people that work for the state and local governments. And that's why it's also important to be a homeowner, because homeowners, you're actually paying money to fund these people. So you have more of a say if you're a homeowner in terms of where your taxes go. And you do that by attending local meetings, council meetings. I personally I did it one time, but I should go more because these are the laws and the rules that affect your day-to-day life. So that's something to consider and something to think about. Point number 2 is this sense of trust and mistrust versus mistrust in our country, in our system. From what I've seen, conservatives don't see the problem. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. They completely trust the way that the structure of our country is built up. When the founding fathers came together in the First and Second Continental Congress, and Patrick Henry's talking about give me liberty or give me death, and they're working hard, and militiamen are out here banging on their little fifes and drums and all that, trying to fight for freedom, that moment in time is probably really the best and only time that they really feel like America should have had anything to pop off at. Freedom, period. Being a patriot, period. After we won the Revolutionary War, we're creating our documentation, we're creating this democracy, we're writing our 10 amendments. From there, I'm sure they were like, that's it, we're good. The country did their thing, turn up, keep it moving. And I believe, y'all, it's a general first impression of the country that holds a lot of these conservatives on. They worked hard for us to have this life that we have now. As a result, I trust the government. The first 10 amendments, you all, give a snapshot of the way that our country was supposed to be created. The 3/5 thing is real, y'all. Women not being included to vote is real. The only people who are allowed to vote are property owners. That's real. And that's what's outlined in our Constitution. So as a result, in my opinion, you all, thoughts of innocent until proven guilty, the violation of the 8th Amendment, which is the cruel and unusual punishment, those things seem to only apply to the ones that are out here who happen to be white, who happen to be male, and honestly, who happen to be property owners. Because in my opinion, you all, there's a correlation with owning property and being wealthy. And generally, it's true, the ones who are wealthier do tend to get off on crimes such as this. So these are the things we have to think about. Why change something in their opinion is not broken? They trust these amendments and what they're supposed to do. They are made to protect us. Our law enforcement is supposed to protect us. That's their job. And if you are a white person who lives in a really nice suburb and you have never really seen these communities, or if you've been told that these communities are bad, these people are criminals, they're horrible, they're thugs, if you're being told that and you've never spoken to someone who doesn't look like you and who may deviate from the intention of the 10 Amendments, you would probably believe it too. And you've never been that person to seek out, to even question if what they're saying is wrong. Shoot, believe it. That's what it is. But there's a trust. There's a sense of trust that they have. Whereas with us, we don't have that trust. We're the victims of that. We're the people where the amendments don't apply. We don't believe that there's a fair and speedy trial. We don't see how we can have the right to an attorney. We don't see that because there is a big discrepancy in those things for our people. And I would argue for minorities in general, the people that were outlined there. So there we do see the holes because we are victims of it. Whereas those on the other side have complete trust in it because in theory it does work to their advantage. If they were to get in trouble and they were to get jailed, they would be entitled to everything that the 10 Amendments align. I was listening to this podcast called Left, Right, and Center, and they did discuss the George Floyd murder. And there was someone from the left, liberal side, from the right, Republican side, and a moderator who was from the center. And this man really had the nerve to say that we're going to let the law handle this. We're going to let our due process. That's what it's there for. We have to trust the system. That's what he said. I trust the system will make a just verdict. That's exactly what he said. I will link that for you guys so you can look. I was shocked to hear that because of the fact that I'm like, well, what about George, who's dead now? What about Trayvon, who's dead? Breonna, who's dead? How come they weren't allowed that? How come they weren't allowed the same rights that these officers and these assailants were allowed to trust the law, to have their due process, to get? Those are the issues that I see. And even when I'm looking at the way that our media portrays our protests, the brave people who are out there, in my opinion, it seems as if they jump from rioters are looting this and that, instead of really understanding the source of the why behind what's been going on. They don't really discuss step 1. They just jump all the way to step 3. Whereas with other news and the way they portray information, and again, they're not perfect either. They have an indicator of why these initiated. It was because of the death of X person. That's why. As opposed to Fox News, for example, is like, oh, there's rioting and looting everywhere. Oh my God, it's terrible. And that's it. There's no reason for discussing the source of the why this has happened. And, this is part of our American system. It's we are supposed to protest. This is part of our First Amendment. But again, when people who deviate from the blueprint of the Constitution participate in our rights, they are very much so our rights as well, then all of a sudden, we're seen as rioters and looters and bad people. Think about that, you all. Think about that as we really understand. It's really important to understand the context of where all of this is coming from, which is so frustrating. So again, you all, it's a sense of trust versus mistrust in our judicial system and consequentially in the fabric of our government, of our system, how it was initiated and created. And you all, the last point that I want to make that I think is possibly the most important, yet the most tricky, is the invisibility of what systematic racism looks like. You all, just because we see it and it's obvious to us does not mean at all that it's obvious to others. And that's really important to know and understand. You all, when I was at Morgan Stanley, I met with financial advisors, and I can tell you that the world that they live in has nothing to do with oppression, has nothing to do with colored folk, has nothing to do with inequality, and it has nothing to do with going outside of whatever is comfortable for them. I want y'all to let that marinate. So if you're on the news and you're looking at these people, and there's a certain narrative about these people that you've never really seen in your life before. You've never really talked to these people. Then you're probably going to make the same conclusions if you're not the type of person to question. And y'all, I'm going to tell you, most people don't question what they've been told. Think about that. And you all, the vast majority of our country consists, not maybe not the vast, but a lot of our country consists of people who have never really seen anyone who looks outside of their world. So when we see the change and talk about white privilege, it's very, very hard for them to understand that, because from what I've seen, white people they're not really white until it's in the context of another minority in our country. They're not white until they're around black people or Asians or Latinos. You all, what systematic racism is it's targeted. It targets a certain group of people and it harms them. For example, as I said before, with the with the crack epidemic of the 80s, it specifically targeted African Americans. And in my opinion, that is one of the most overt ways of criminalizing African Americans for something that our entire country does. Opioids, you all. Taking too much Adderall, selling prescription pills on campuses are not uncommon amongst our white counterparts. But why aren't they being convicted for it at the same rate as we are? What Ronald Reagan did in the 80s, you all, was this, as we know, this war on drugs. And what he did was, specifically with crack cocaine, was when people would get arrested for drug possession. Now, crack cocaine is more popular in urban communities because it's much cheaper to make. Cocaine is expensive. It's an expensive drug. So as a result, wealthy people who were generally white were able to snort their cocaine freely because there wasn't really a law mandating cocaine use, crack cocaine use. Crack cocaine use was the drug that gets convicted. It just so happens to be that African Americans are being convicted of that because they're the ones that were using crack cocaine more so than cocaine. Because again, cocaine is way more expensive. That is a form of targeted racism. Just because slavery is over, what is it, y'all? Goodness, 150 years ago, does not mean that the way that we're being treated has changed at all. So it's important for us, you guys, that they understand what it looks like, and again, a lot of conservative white people just don't see anything wrong with the system because the system benefits them every day. And I don't believe they've really seen people who have suffered in a way that we have. And I hate to use that word suffer, but I don't believe these people have been around people who don't have the same access to the very basics of life, your food, water, and shelter, because those things are grandfathered and those things are given to them. So it's so difficult to shed light into this systematic racism that we witness because it's invisible. And unless you are acute, or in my opinion, unless you are a person who is affected by it, it's so hard to see. And I think that's part of the reason why it is so difficult for our conservative counterparts to truly understand the plight that we are in when it comes to police brutality. So guys, we know that there is we have our 8 demands that we just have coming up, helping de-unionize a bit police, creating justice for everyone who was hurt. Y'all, there's still so much work to do. Y'all, I had the pleasure of going and participating in a protest a couple of days ago, and I didn't think I would be that person to be out there. I was scared. I read the news. You're looking at it. It's like, oh my God, it's crazy out there. But what I saw, you all, was amazing. I saw people giving water and making sure you were okay, staying hydrated, making sure you register to vote, giving food to immigrants who don't have the same privileges as an American citizen as I do as an African American. I even have privileges for being a citizen of this country. And y'all, I was on the floor. I was on the concrete ground for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, really trying to fathom how they could keep someone down on the ground for so long. And on top of that, there's so much military presence downtown. But you all, ironically, and I've said this on my Instagram post, but I really want to share this with you all, I never felt more proud of being an American, y'all. I really do feel that way. I love this country. I love being an American citizen. I love the fact that I'm a minority in this country because I have the power of looking and seeing the holes in our system, and I can help work to make it better and a more inclusive country for every person here. I love this country. And in order for me to continue to love this country, I want to fight in any way that I can. And I need to understand exactly why these people don't see what we find so obvious. You all, my last point, and I feel like I might be rambling a little bit, but my last point I want to share with you all is that I do feel like there's been some debate in terms of what you can do to be more active in the community, to be more active within this moment, this movement. And you have to pick your poison and don't feel guilty for not doing something that you feel like you should be obligated to do. If you're that protester, by all means get your sign, pick it your way through, and fight what's right for us. If you have any extra money to donate, by all means, donate to the many organizations. A lot of celebrities are posting organizations for the Black Lives Matter movements and ways to support Black businesses. If you're an Instagram person, just tag your favorite Black-owned business. I got tagged. I was very, very, very honored. That makes your day. This is so important. There's ways to do your part and make this stick, y'all. This isn't a trend. Let's continue to make this stick. So you guys, I would love to know your thoughts about what you thought about the show. By all means, please make sure that you let me know what you thought. We will be resuming with money, of course, but I really wanted to share with you guys what I saw in terms of why we haven't really had change made yet, and what is it about our observations and what we find obvious that the other side of the aisle doesn't seem to see. This is Ashley of Stacks and the City signing off. I am so grateful for y'all's continued support. Super grateful. Keep me informed on your money whereabouts as well as your life whereabouts too. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye, y'all.